being used, then yeah, just feel free to get in touch and I will let you know about that. Amel kind of explained the agenda, but as we go through, each of you is going to make a contribution and share your resource that you've sent in advance. I'll remind you of this when we get to it, but it'd be great if you could explain your strategy and resource. So we've got those on the PowerPoint with the anything that you've sent in advance to show everyone who's on the call, and then explain how you've used this effectively, which might be with your example. And it'd be great because we've got a variety of different subjects for you to have a think about how that could work in other subjects and topics, and people can definitely get involved in contributing ideas to other people's resources on that, and then there'll be space for questions for you on your resource at the end. And at the end of the call, we're going to ask you to give us some feedback on how it worked, so that when we run these again, we can continue to make improvements. So please do make sure you do that for us, because it'd be really helpful. So you might have been wondering why we picked assessment and differentiation. So these were the two areas from the progression framework under the teacher standards section that came out as the focus for development, both across the Northwest cohort and nationally as well. So there was a theme of these two progression framework descriptors or teacher standards being set as objectives in half term 2. So everyone nationally on the Year 2 programme needs to reach a C in these descriptors by the end of the year, and you can see where people are at currently. It's primarily Bs, but also quite a high percentage of As, so we really want to push this and support you to get you up to those Cs, and you can see what that needs to look like in the bullet points. We'll come back to these at the end and have a think about where you are at, and if there's any more work that you can do aside from this call in order to work on them. So we're going to start off by asking you to share your thoughts on what effective assessment and differentiation look like in your classroom, in other classrooms that you've seen, or just what that means to you. So if you follow the link to the Padlet that Amel has put into the chat, you'll be able to contribute your ideas on there. So please do start adding things under the two headings. There's a column for assessment and a column for differentiation. So what does good look like? Good assessment and good differentiation, or what do those two things mean to you? Let me know if you're having any problems following the link.
Hello, it's perfect.
We could hear you then, Matt. If you want to call in and then put it on mute, you should be able to hear.
Sorry, I think that was me. I've just changed computers, sorry.
Oh, sorry, that's all right.
It's Rob. Cheers.
Yeah.
So you can hear me, because it's not going to be easy if not.
Okay, thanks for your contributions to that. We're just going to ask a couple of people to summarise back each of those two columns. So, Rob, would you mind just summarising what's come up in the assessment column? Now you can speak.
Of course I can. So in the assessment column, we got regularity. So good assessment occurs at regular points throughout lessons and should preferably be immediate. So there's a discussion and it goes on later. Someone else's, well, the same point says we should do it every 10-15 minutes throughout a lesson. Someone said it leads to differentiation. It says once you've done AFL at the midpoint of the lesson, then students have a bit more idea whether to stretch themselves if they need a helping hand. And someone's mentioned assessment of learning, so doing low stakes assessments, and it reflects what's been taught.
Okay.
That's it.
That's great, thank you, Rob. And yeah, that nicely segues into differentiation and how one informs the other. Charles, would you mind summarising differentiation for us?
Yeah, that's fine. There's no element on there. The first bit says increased equality of access to lesson content, so ensuring that everybody can access the lesson content. And then the second one is talking about accounting for the prior knowledge of the pupils and also talking about differentiating by scaffolding a task, I would assume, rather than actually getting pupils to do different tasks, and shouldn't allow pupils to choose to opt out of the required practice that they need.
Okay, that's great, thanks. So hopefully that should summarise the reasons why you've signed up to do the call.
And something important just to point out is that we're not going to go into lots of details about these principles on that call. There are going to be conference day sessions, one on assessment and one on differentiation, that will give you lots of input about what that looks like. So today is the point of today is to share your ideas and your resources. But if you want more of kind of input on that, then definitely sign up for those conference day sessions. And also reading in our fortnightly bulletins around this as well.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on to now the teaching marketplace bit of the call. So this is where you're all going to have the opportunity to showcase the strategy which you have then chosen to present. You'll have about 5 minutes in total, and it'd be helpful if in those 5 minutes you could cover explaining your strategy, so how does this work in the classroom, how you've used it effectively or a way in which it's worked really well, and then thinking how it could be applied across subjects or used in different topics as like a flexible tool. That would be really helpful because we've got people from across different subjects on the call. And then at the end of that, there'll be the opportunity for people to ask you clarifying questions around how you've used it, and also for them to feed in ideas on how you could build on that strategy. Does that all sound straightforward enough? I'll take that as a yes. So we're going to move on to our first strategy, and that comes from Lauren.
Except I think Lauren may be having difficulties, so Lauren, let us know if you are able to in the IM. If you're aware that your microphone isn't working, it might be worth preparing just a little bit that you would like to say about yours ready to type into the chat. So to explain the strategy. Yeah, so Lauren's on under Matt's name. Okay, I think what we'll do is move on to the next person who I think is able to speak, which is Jess.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So basically this is just quiz trade but differentiated, because I found quiz trade to be a really good activity, but it sort of didn't really allow me to stretch or challenge and didn't really allow me to differentiate. So what I started to do was print the slips on red, amber and green card depending on how difficult the sentences were. So for example, the red one in this example is just a simple sentence, and it's something that this was for year 8. My year 8 should really be able to say in Spanish without much assistance. And then the amber one was a complex sentence. So obviously they had to give a statement and then give an explanation for their opinions. And then the third one included a negative structure. So what I did was distributed the slips out amongst my class, depending on who I wanted to start with which coloured slip. So for example, if it was someone who was quite lower ability, I'd give them the red slip first, just so they didn't sort of get a bit scared by the whole thing and not really want to participate. And then I made sure that higher ability started off with a green slip, so then they were obviously immediately stretched and challenged. But then it doesn't really just restrict the lower ability to really easy ones, and it doesn't restrict the higher ability to high ones, because obviously they have to go around the classroom swapping and changing. So it's just a better way really for me to differentiate in this activity. And I guess you could do it in a lot of different subjects. For example, you could do it in maths with a red slip would be like a really easy equation to get the answer to, and then a green slip would be obviously something more complex. Or it could be, you know, it could be red, amber and green based on different levels of blooms that it requires, or there's sort of like a wide range of things that you can do with it. So
that sounds great. Does anyone have any questions on that particular activity for Jess before we go on to your second slide?
So I'm not sure if you can see, Jess, there's a question from Abby Walker asking what quiz trade is.
All right, okay.
Explain how it works a little bit.
Yeah, so quiz trade is basically kids have a question on the paper, and they have an answer on the paper as well. So everyone in the class starts off with a piece of paper and it'll have a question on it, and it'll also have an answer. So you have to walk around the room finding people to ask your question to. And they have to give you the answer, and they'll also have a piece of paper. So for example, if I were doing it with I don't know, like Shane, I'd ask Shane my question, and then Shane would have to give me the answer, and then once he's given me the correct answer, he can ask me his question, and I have to give him his answer, give him the answer to that question, and then we swap and then go and find other people. So you're constantly getting different questions all of the time. So there is no bull ring in Wigan, by the way.
Jess.
So yeah, that's how it works.
I taught languages as well. This activity goes down really well with pupils.
Yeah, they love it, don't they?
But yeah, they do really enjoy it, and it's a great way to practice speaking and also to model what good looks like as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. So we'll go on to your second slide, which is a little bit small, but I will be sending all of these resources out afterwards.
Yeah, so basically this one, I started to do it because my deputy head sort of was getting quite big on success criteria and sort of subtly embedding success criteria into all of your lessons. So what I started to do was, with classes that were really difficult in terms of behaviour management, I wanted to have everything that I needed for the lesson on a piece of paper before we started. So what I started to do was put different activities on this piece of paper that we could use throughout the lesson and colour code them. So for example, in this example, my red outcome was just to remember topic vocabulary, so it's sort of like really easy, like a really easy thing to do. So my pupils know that because the do now is red, by doing the do now they will achieve the red outcome. And then for example, in my first activity, which is just a gap fill, which we sort of they do on their own and then we go through as a class, they know that if they can do that, then they're fulfilling the amber outcome, which is using topic vocab in sentences. So it's differentiated because, for example, the do now is a really easy activity to do. So for example, lower ability kids feel fine with starting on that, and then if they can't move on to the amber, then it's not just differentiation, it's assessment, because I know then that they can't actually put that word into a sentence. And then when there's on the back of the sheet, because obviously I couldn't put the whole thing on, there's challenge tasks which are in purple, and they always know that the challenge tasks are in purple, and they're sort of for the gifted and talented children or more able. And they, when they have done all of the red, amber and green tasks, they can then move on to the purple tasks, which obviously a child of a lower ability probably wouldn't get to, but it just ensures that my higher ability don't just, stick with the masses of the class, and they can actually get stretched. So.
And do you have everyone starting at red, or do you have like different starting points for different groups of pupils?
I do. The only reason I have everyone starting on red is because my school's got a policy where you have to have a junior that's just like a settler. But with, for example, Key Stage 4, I don't normally do that, and I'll do things like I'll give, because I've got some native speakers in my classes, so they might start on a purple. And they know that throughout the whole lesson they'll never come back down from a purple, they'll never be on an amber or a green. So I always just try and colour code every single activity that I give them, just so they know which point they're at throughout the lesson.
Great, thank you. Has anyone got any questions for Jess on the second strategy?
Great. Okay, what might be a good idea to do next is just go back to Lauren's, and for anyone that's joined over the phone, I'll just read out her explanation. So hopefully you can see Lauren's is the challenge grid. So she said it's essentially various differentiated questions on a topic. So she uses them for poetry, anthology and English Lit, which are colour-coded with each colour worth a different number of points respectively. They have to earn, or the pupils have to earn a certain number of points in a given amount of time. She's used it for starters or even whole lessons. It helps kids to self-differentiate because they can start with questions they feel more comfortable.
Can I stop you there, Holly?
Yeah.
I think we've got Lauren on the line.
Amazing. Lauren, do you want to explain yourself? Thank you.
Sure. Sorry, we've had some technical issues. Basically, it's just like a grid of differentiated questions about a specific topic. So we've got one for each of the poems in the anthology. And you can put it up, you can use it for a starter or just one task, or for a whole lesson. They're good for revision as well. You can just print them off and give them out. And the kids have got to sort of work out a certain number of points. So maybe like 10 points, 5 points, whatever, however much time you want to use. And they can build it up. So if they do a language question, because those are usually the hardest, then that's worth 4 points. But if they do a meaning question, because those are normally pretty easy, it's only worth 1. So they'd have to do 4 times as many. So it means they can self-differentiate, and the ones that are maybe a little bit underconfident can build up smaller numbers of points into something a little bit bigger. And the ones that want to stretch and challenge themselves can go for prizes and stuff like that. So yeah, it's been pretty useful. And as Matt pointed out, it's also numeracy, which is, good if you sat next to a numeracy coordinator. So yeah, that's pretty much it. But if anyone does Educast, then we've got one for all of the poems in the Educast anthology, so I'll send them to you. And that's it.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And yeah, I forgot to mention earlier, we'll share all these resources, and you should have each other's email addresses through that to follow anything up. Does anyone have any questions that Lauren will now be able to answer? And Lauren, how did you manage to join us, just in case anyone else is having difficulties?
It was all Matt.
Okay. Over your laptop.
We've got you on the phone for the so we can hear you and we can talk. But then we're watching on the computer as well, so we're connected twice.
Great. Okay. If there's no questions, next we have Claire. Don't forget to unmute yourself, Claire. We can't hear you yet. Yeah,
hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so I've got my phone on and my laptop. Can hear 2 people.
Do you want to press mute on the laptop? If you can over the phone, and then there you go.
Great.
Okay, great.
I'm just going to talk through this. So what we do in our department is something totally different, and I found it saved a massive amount of time with marking, and also it saved a massive amount of time in terms of obviously kind of writing in books and stuff like that. So what we do is a 4 to 2 kind of lesson plan. So we teach 4 lessons, and then after 4 lessons we'll do 2 assessment tasks. So the first assessment task that we've got is then basically just to check understanding. So we've got a higher and we've got a foundation. Now the first thing that they do is we show them like a video, and they draw like a mind map based on what they see in that video. and then depending if we've like identified as higher or foundation, and we'll get them to complete exam style questions afterwards. Now that is the only piece of material we're meant to mark in their books, and then based on what they've done on that assessment task, we then move on to the next part where it says people respond to MRI, and we've got these like different coloured sheets that we stick into their books, and we circle what they've done particularly well, and then we circle what they need to do to improve or progress their learning. Now again, it's totally differentiated in terms of, obviously we've got easy questions going down to more harder, more Bloom's taxonomy really, and then after they've had a chance to MRI, we'll go over something that the whole class has done particularly poor in, or again you can differentiate the questions when it comes to that something revisited lesson in regards to what it is you do with them. So you could have whoever got question 2, if you can answer this question, whoever got question 3, can you complete this sheet? Question 4, can you complete this sheet? As I said, if you have a look through the resources, it'll make a bit more sense rather than kind of me talking about it yet. So the assessment for learning task, as you can see, has got foundation high questions. Again, if you want to push your students, you can choose to give them the high paper. If not, you can choose the foundation questions. So basically, this is the only thing that we mark in their books. Yeah, that's the only thing we mark in their books. We don't want to see any other forms of marking apart from. So on this task, ideally, there should be a 6-mark question that we have to mark: spelling, punctuation, and grammar. And we're quite lucky in the science department in terms of that's all they've asked us to mark. If you move on to the next slide, sorry. Yeah, they've got again, these are foundation and higher. And again, it's with circling the questions that we would like them to answer. Again, going from, I think it's embedding to exceeding, just again to differentiate within the class. And then the next lesson is a something revisited lesson. Again, yes, thanks. So we can say over to the next one. To help support them, because I know when we ask pupils questions, it's questions that they haven't got right, and we just expect them to know the answer. And we've asked them that question because they haven't got it right. So what I do is a help sheet. So I kind of give them support to answer whatever question they've been asked, rather than getting asked by 30 different pupils, miss, what's the answer? So this is kind of a help sheet to support them, and normally also on the MRI sheet put the page numbers they can turn to the textbook to help them. And then eventually, after giving them 15 to 20 minutes to answer their question, and I might circle more than one question for them, I've actually got an answer sheet to give out to them. Again, it's more to save me time when coming back to marking their work, because I know at the end I've gave them an answer sheet to kind of self-assess their work and see what else that they need to do. But no, I think it's saved a massive amount of time, and I think it has a bit, the pupils seem to enjoy it a bit more, and again, you get more time to plan lessons rather than just marking for the sake of SLT. But yeah, that's all I've got to say, really.
No, that sounds great. Thank you, Claire. That was really thorough. Has anyone got any questions? And did you say you'd be happy to? So we've got these resources on the PowerPoint. Yeah. Would you be happy to share them if anyone was?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's saved a massive amount of time, and definitely advise anyone to go to the department and suggest doing something similar.
Amazing. Thank you, Claire.
Right, next up is Charles.
Yeah, hi. The first slide here was just kind of a set of principles that touch upon both, assessment and differentiation that I've been trying to embed this year. Most of you would have probably seen them before. They're by Barak Rosenshine, and just principles of instruction. There are 10 of them. I know that I think Teach First pushing a bit with their 2017 participants. And I just draw your attention to the last one, which is what I'll talk about: engage students in weekly and monthly review. Basically, each of these principles have been identified because they are seen to be the most effective in terms of teachers' results, in terms of their backing from cognitive science, and then in terms of what's been seen to be effective when people have gone and observed, the teachers that get those best results. And yeah, engaging students in weekly and monthly review, quite similar to one we've just had. What I'll do is after we've had, say, 6, 7, 8 lessons, we'll do a low stakes cumulative assessment on everything we've had so far. And the pupils really like it because it reminds them of what we've covered throughout the year. It's low stakes, so they really care about making sure that they get what they've got wrong correct. And you know, they really sort of get stuck into improving the stuff that they got wrong. Similar again to the previous person who's speaking, this is the only marking that we would do in our department, in the maths department. So every 2 weeks we'll give them a cumulative test of what we've covered so far. It'll just be low stakes. It'll just be in their books. They're allowed to refer to their notes, and they'll self-assess it. And then if there are any questions that they're still struggling with, we'll go through and at that point give them feedback in their books. So it cuts out a lot of the sort of feedback for the sake of feedback, because you're only focusing on the questions that they're struggling, that they can't correct themselves or get a peer to correct. So yeah, that was just the element of those principles that I was going to focus on. But if you've not used them before, I would really recommend taking a look and have a look at the paper, because they've helped me massively this year. And whenever I've been observed, I've always asked for whoever's observing me to sort of have a look at these principles and see to what extent I was using those in my lessons. And then just as an example of something I've taken from that, if you just move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. And the next one. So essentially, this is just a lesson I've seen recently in terms of algebraic proofs, and it's quite a difficult topic to teach in terms of maintaining attention whilst you're explaining it. So taking some of the principles that were outlined in the document just set up, in terms of sort of scaffolding and asking a large number of questions and that sort of thing. What I started to do was throughout the instruction, so when this was being explained, sort of just have another slide in there with lots of the words blanked out, so that as the proof was being introduced, you could use that as an opportunity to sort of ask around the class, you know, what word would go here, would another word work, why is it that word, etc. You know, just to you know, ensure that people are paying attention all the way through. And then what that's useful for is that displaying a slide like this, if this is, say, part of an assessment, you know, during a lesson, if it's low stakes or even the cumulative assessment, is that this can provide the scaffolding for the you know, the sort of low attaining pupils, whereas the you know, the higher ability pupils can use this, well, can just do the proof without looking at the scaffolding at all. So what it allows you to do is sort of differentiate by the amount of support you're giving rather than the actual task, because at the end of it, when you go through it as a class, everyone should have the same proof in front of them. It's just that some people have had you know, a bit more support in getting there, which is really useful for differentiation, because when you come to review that question as a class, because everyone's done the same task, you can ask you know, whole class questions. You know, you might develop them a little bit more for some people, but it's nice to keep everybody on the same task and just differentiate by the amount of support that they are given. So that's all really.
Great, thank you, Charles. Does anyone have any questions for Charles about that one? And you're absolutely right about this being a really key thing that has been taught to the 2017s. I think it is really important to share that with you guys as well. Go on, Matt.
Cool. Hi, Charles.
Matt.
I was just wondering, the principles sound great, and I'll definitely check that out. But when you're doing scaffolding, and use of scaffolding, how do you? Like, I found I was really into that last year and tried to use it a lot. But struggled sometimes with working out exactly what kids would find useful, and sometimes actually you'd provide them with some scaffolding, they'd be like, wait a minute, why is that there? And you're like, well, because that's the first step. And they're like, yeah, but it doesn't really help me. And then, you know, you give them the sheet like the level up, and they're like, oh yeah, no, I know what I'm doing now. Do you ever find that, or is it like have you had to play around?
Yeah, no,
with
no, I completely get you. And sometimes I think you think you're giving them scaffolding, but you're actually just giving them more information that's confusing them. But that I've definitely done that before. Something that I've used a lot this year is, for example, if you're solving equations, just solving it exactly as I would set it out on the board. And then sometimes what I do is, for the example that I've been through on the board, I'll just wipe out a couple of the steps, and then I'll just let them go through it as their first example. Because that way we've been through it, we've talked through it, they know where they're going. It's just a question of them at that point sort of redoing what we have done.
Cool, yeah, that sounds like an interesting idea.
But
is that your dog?
But yes, sorry.
Is that your dog?
It's not my dog, no.
Sorry, I thought I was muted.
No, it's not my dog. But yeah, and I think also sometimes just spending 5 minutes before lesson, like setting up my whiteboard or setting up a scaffolded example before the lesson. So I just think about, which steps I want to give them and which steps, won't be useful. It can be something as simple as on the starter, because we do a mixed set of questions. If it's dividing by fraction, just writing the prompt, multiply by the reciprocal, and then putting in the second line of working where they just need to fill in the what the reciprocal would be. So you keep it exactly the same, but you just change one thing. And I think also minimizing what they have to think about, if that makes sense. So like for example, on the one on the screen, they only have to think about at one point sort of one word. If I'm going through it, if I've been through the first line and I cover it up and then I say, right, which was the word that goes in there, just so they don't get too confused by the too much information.
Yeah, no, I really like the idea of using your example as the first one, because then there's no shift from your board work to a sheet, even if it's the same.
Yeah, exactly, and with the one on the board, that's exactly what I did. I said, look, the first proof that we're going to do is the one we've just done on the board. You just need to redo it. If you can do it without looking at it all, perfect. If you need to use the scaffolding, and then if you really don't know it, just write it out and leave the gaps. And
Sweet. Cool. Thanks, Charles.
Thanks, Matt.
Great, thank you, Charles. I think we'll move on to the next person now.
Which is Alex, if he can hear us, but Mel's just going to ask him, or maybe he'll be able to see. Alex, if you can hear us, then feel free to add your explanation, or you might add it into the comments. And also, just while we wait for that, I don't think
I can't hear you, Alex. Sorry.
So I don't know how clearly I explained at the beginning that Alex and Claire and Rob are ambassadors who joined us to share their ideas as well. So yeah, we really appreciate your time, and also do after you've done your bit, if you do have other things that you need to go and do, feel free to do that. We really appreciate you being on the call. So Alex, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. So this is a lesson I did to teach basically how to analyse metaphors in poetry. And this is just a poem that we're studying, so we can just skip along to the actual task itself. So this is a hinge task. It's not. You may probably have seen them before, but I taught the skill previous to the task, about 20 minutes of the lesson, and about how to split metaphors into three stages. So these are all the second column are all what you call a comparative vehicle, so what something is being compared to in a metaphor. And the pupils then have to try and fill out as much as possible from this table. So quite a bit of preparation goes into it, but it's quite an extensive task. Give them about 10 minutes and see how far along they can get with it. So then we move on to the next slide. That's just a model of what a good answer looks like, a kind of a complete answer, a complete row, and then we move on along. And here it's a master of self-assessment. So you can see there are basically three levels of how well they did it. They either filled in all of it, some of it, or hardly any of it. And then at that point, that's when they either go on to the least challenging task, which would be something that you provide for them, which could be an extension sheet. Well, I called it an extension sheet, but really it's just a piece of scaffolded work. Or on the bottom left is the most challenging one, which is kind of like the most obscure metaphor in this case. So with English, it's actually more. I think it's more difficult to do than with a lot of other subjects. I would, if I was to fellow English teachers, I'd only recommend doing it if you can really tightly control the self-assessment part of it. But if you've got something that's quite self-contained in that respect, then it is a good way to assess them in the lesson, but then also it's good for differentiation within that lesson as well. So the idea is you're not just kind of pigeonholing pupils from the very beginning. Everyone starts out at the same point basically, and then they can move on from there, and maybe they'll shine in that lesson rather than, so you're not restricting them essentially is what we're attempting to do.
Great, thanks Alex. And I also included on here just your extension sheets that you sent over as well.
Yeah, so that, again, that was just, I call it an extension sheet, but that's just kind of like, I think, save the kids' blushes in case they feel like they don't get it. It's just a very heavily scaffolded approach. So, I mean, I think the thing with these differentiated bits is you can anticipate with your class if you feel like some people will need this sheet. But obviously, the idea is that you're not, even if you think that some people will need it, you want to give them the chance to excel without it. That's the idea behind the whole approach.
Amazing, thank you. So yeah, and I've got those resources if anyone would like them sharing, or obviously get in touch with Alex as well. Thank you, Alex. So next, or has anyone got any questions for Alex first of all? And the next person we're going on to is Rob. So as we're going along, do add your questions into the chat as well, if it's helpful.
Oh yeah, so I'm just going to briefly talk about some assessment strategies. I know when I did the Teach First programme, assessment for learning was always one that was brought with me. So hopefully these will be nice and straightforward, low cost, low effort things that you can implement in your lessons. They're not subject specific. I was talking to some colleagues throughout different departments. So these are a variety of things that some I do regularly, some I need to do regularly. So here's some ideas. So the first one is these red, yellow and green cups. And the idea is each student has a stack, as you can see, of red, yellow and green cups. I'm just going to read them. That's just if anyone wants them afterwards. So the red, yellow and green cups. The green cup is I've got the task. The amber cup is I'm not too sure. And red is like help me, I need some help. Instantly you can see which students have understood what you've just taught by seeing a sea of green, yellow and red cups. Great for observations, great for you, knowing which students to go and see. There's a few things you can do with them. Green cups, because they've got it, can help red cups or help amber cups in your table. You can move some kids around so the greens are paired with reds. If you've got red cups, you come and sit over here for a bit. You can then give them some intervention whilst the green cups are getting on with the work. It's quite good. The only problem is you might get some kids obviously shying away from it, not wanting to admit it. But then eventually, the more you use it, the more they realise, oh, hang on, I'm not getting any help here. So that's the idea of the red, yellow, green cups. It's a bit like the bottom one, which I put hands up. It's like instant, it's permanent hands up. So the kids you're always getting some feedback, and they can change it throughout the lesson once they've got it and so on. And the hands up is something that goes unmissed, I think, sometimes. You can use it to check if students have got the question right. So at the end, put your hand up if you got it right. Mine's simple AFL, as surprising as it is. Some other good things to do with hands is rate 1 to 5 how easy you found the topic, similar to the cups. So the kids can put a number of fingers up how many they've got an idea. And the other idea is you can use it to vote with. The only thing there is obviously make sure students have voted. Often I count hands and then go, there's only 7 people in the class apparently, and I've got 30 in front of me, and then you can re-vote and stuff. The stickers was an idea of a colleague of mine. Once a kid's done an assessment, they pick a sticker and stick it on the top of their assessment, and that's based on how hard they found the test. And I was like, oh, well, fair enough. But what's quite good is the kids then self-assess how difficult they found it, which will help later with revision. They can revisit that test again. And actually, you get kids getting full marks on an assessment, but it's been really hard for them to do it. So obviously, they might give themselves like a silver or a bronze, even if you got full marks. So they do know that's an area of weakness. Other things you can do with them is you can stick them to certain questions. If the kids can gold the question that they found the easiest, or then silver and red and bronze the one they found the hardest and stuff. So there's some nice assessment things you can do, and obviously the stickers are talking about self-assessment, which is a form of AFL. On the next, well, if you flip a slide and then another one, is responding to marking. I know people have spoken already about having a lesson to feedback. I know people call it dirt and all those ideas, but we do this all the time in maths. We write a bank of similar questions, so the kids do the corrections and then do a bank of similar questions. There's some ideas, obviously, that you can put on the board. Would I use those? I'm just saying, here's some stuff to give them some guidance of what they could be doing. So I usually just put bullet points in, like, create your test using the feedback I'm giving you, ask for help if you're stuck, and then have a go at the similar questions of the ones you got wrong. And then the last one is, I know we've talked about self-assessment slightly, so there's some ideas at the end of what you could do. And peer assessment, the ideas that I was putting on here is, obviously, peer assessment, they need clear time and guidance of how to do it. The problem is you obviously get ticks like, I really like this was nice. I've put some stuff like sharing mark schemes with the kids, looking out for common misconceptions. An idea that that was found is you could always scan in someone's work of a kid that's done all right, made some misconceptions, and talk through it all. The kids can peer assess one piece of work, drawing out the misconceptions that you don't want them to make, and you can highlight them together at the end, and then they can go and assess a different piece of work or their own. I'm like, look out, did you make this misconception? Maybe write them on the board as you go. Obviously, all that takes is you scanning something. And then the last thing I put was perhaps you could do some target marking. So if you don't want to do all that on one assessment for the kids, you could just focus on the introduction to like a paragraph and an essay, or you're just looking at this part of the question of an assessment. I wrote them up. Obviously, you saw those in the slides, those general ideas, but I just wanted to fire 6, 7 assessment for learning stuff that you can do. My personal favourites is I like the cup idea, the fact you can see them all the time, and then obviously the stickers give some self-assessment. So cheers, there's my ideas. If anyone's got any questions, fire away.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks for sharing things which are kind of quick to implement and apply to all subjects as well. It's really helpful to have a reminder of those like simple but effective techniques in relation to differentiation and assessment.
And maybe assessment, but yes. Yeah, anyone got any questions or anything? Are we all right? Cool. Well, thanks.
Brilliant.
I'll hang around anyway.
Okay, so next we've got Shane.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Shane.
This is something that I use in English called the margin buddy. I stole the idea off Twitter. And the idea is that the kids stick these down the side of the page and write the response. So, for example, it could be, I think this is an example of a literature question. They write the response alongside that. Now, this is a paragraph example that you can see in front of you. So, the idea is that down the left-hand side, the kids are provided with sentence starters. There's stuff on there, like in the red box there, like use subject terminology, identify the writer's intention. Those are linked to the assessment criteria. And it just breaks it down. I mean, I'm looking at Ruin's explanation here, and it's a similar sort of idea, I think. But whereas he's called is a Peter paragraph, mine's a PEAD paragraph. I give them little bits of advice in there, like try to use more than one quotation if you're going to make a point. So just basically so that they can pick up as many marks as possible. I find them really useful actually, and they can be adjusted for sort of anything you're teaching. At our school now, these are used in all different subjects. So in history, you can make these like a page and a half long if they're doing an essay, and include like pointers, what things they need to include in each paragraph. I mean, that's sort of basically it. Are there any questions?
Great, thank you, Shane. That was really helpful. Next up is Leon.
Hi, you're all right?
Hi, Liam.
Okay, so mine is quite hopefully simple but effective. I think it's kind of based around the fact that I'm mindful when differentiating in history, there's only one level of assessment. So when students do the history GCSE exam, they will all do the same paper. So it's not so much about differentiating resources as such, it's more about differentiating approaches. Now, roughly about half the marks available are based on how students respond to different interpretations of history. So that interpretation could be a cartoon, as evidenced here today. It could be an extract from a speech. It could be a kind of newspaper headline, whatever it is. And it's really about encouraging the students to think differently about it. So what you'll see before I get them to answer the question is how I get them to engage with a certain interpretation. Now, for the higher ability students, what I'll do is broadly sort of do that kind of layers of inference grid, which has kind of broadly in accordance with, you know, your higher order skills. It'll have describe, explain, evaluate, or whatever you can. You can insert anything in there really. And what I'll do, I'll encourage the students to kind of work outwards using a kind of slightly more finessed or slightly higher order skill each time. For the lower ability students, what I'll do is kind of just dissect the page, as you can see on the second sort of cartoon, on the second sample. Well, it's the first one, I think, on the first sample. And what that does there is just kind of encourage the student, not so much worry about analysis, not so much worry about kind of description, not so much worry about particular layers of inference in it, but just really what they can spot and encourage them to do that. So it's just about kind of using differentiation to encourage different approaches more than anything else. Because as I say, there's not too much point necessarily differentiating the resource, more about how you present the resource, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I had the wrong, so the slide that I think you were talking about, first of all, is the one that's on the screen now, because I know you can't, I don't think you can see the screen. So yeah, just so that everyone else knows which slide you were talking about for which. And then I think the second one that you were talking about was this one that I had up. If everyone can see that. Has anyone got any questions for Leon? I might have confused it a little bit. Great, okay, so next is ruins, and just for the benefit of anyone who can't see, I'll read out what he's written as his explanation because he's had to leave. So he said this is a writing frame that allows students to build a Peter paragraph that is suitable for answering almost all English lit techniques, point evidence technique, effect on the reader. The idea is that it can be used from year 7 all the way through to year 11 and can be adapted for differing needs within an individual classroom. Information can be added or removed as to meet the requirement of the individual student. Top level students will effectively receive the acronym PETA, whilst it will be adequately scaffolded for lower ability to the extent that it effectively becomes a closed gap filling exercise. Moreover, and more likely, the wheel can be used to suit somewhere in the middle of these with sentence starters or hints without becoming too prescriptive. The idea is that the scaffold can be gradually removed as required to promote independent use of the PETA paragraph. So the resource is there on the PowerPoint and it'll be shared afterwards, but do get in touch with Ruin if you have any questions about his. And so we're coming towards the end. We've got Matt up next. If you're still there, Matt.
Yeah, still, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is just a resource that is quite popular in my department. It's just stolen actually from a website called Miss B, who has some quite interesting stuff. And it's just I think by the sounds of it, everyone's all about like self-differentiation and letting the pupils decide. And it's just quite a nice sheet that has obviously 4 different levels of question. So the first one is just really like practicing the basic skill. Skill 2, then moving on to a slightly higher level skill, and then with the 2 stretch tasks starting to bring in like other topics, or bringing in more than one topic into questions, or just like challenging pupils to think outside the box a bit and to go on to stuff that you haven't necessarily covered, and having to use their like problem solving skills a bit to be able to apply what they've learned already to that sort of thing. There's also a wee little literacy box, which is always good in maths because it can be tough to get the literacy stuff in. But yeah, so it's just quite a basic example really, but just something that we use quite regularly.
Great, thanks Matt. And did you want to?
Yeah. So this is, we've been in our department this year. Everyone's like really keen on exit tickets, which is something that like we talked about a lot at summer institute and things last year. But to be honest, I never really used. But actually, they're really good, and I guess as an assessment for learning tool, can be really effective. So it's interesting to hear what Rob had to say. I'm quite keen on the I guess more like soft assessment for learning that he was talking about, and using like fist to fives and that sort of thing. But actually at the end of a lesson, just allowing 5-10 minutes for something like this, which is usually like an exam question. The kids basically see how confident they feel on what they've learned in the lesson so far, have a go at a question and write a comment discussing like maybe what they found difficult or what they found easy in the lesson, or how they like the links that they can see with other stuff that they've learned. And it saves loads of time on marking. So when I'm marking now, I'll just mark the exit ticket, and then from that you can really see whether a kid's like understood what the whole point of the lesson was or not. And if not, then maybe it's something you need to revisit, especially if like lots of the class at the end of the lesson obviously haven't got it. And if they have got it, then you think grand, well, we can move on and feel confident that the majority of the class have understood it. So it's just, I don't know how many other people use them, but I've found them to be really effective this year. Just gives closure at the end of a lesson, really, to say whether pupils have picked up what you've done or not.
Amazing, and I'm a big fan of an exit ticket, and had a really good coaching conversation with someone about that today. So, good reminder. Has anyone got any questions for Matt about his 2 strategies? Great, okay, so we are running a little bit behind because you've all shared and explained your fantastic resources. So we're going to skip past the open space straight on to your making commitments as to what you're going to do next.
Yes, so we just thought it'd be useful for you to have a few moments to think about like what have you taken from this call, and like what are you going to do with the information that you've gained from it. We're happy for you to share that through speaking or through the chat. Something that I've been reflecting on is the value it could be valuable to have 2017s on this call as well. Some of these strategies are really transferable and have been explained really well. So thank you very much for sharing everything. So if we give you 30 seconds to a minute now, and feel free to chip in with what have you taken away from this call, what your next step's going to be, or feel free to write a comment if that's better for you.
Great, thank you for getting involved, and yeah, I completely appreciate your comment, Shane, about the subject-specific resources, and being able to steal them directly is really handy, but I hope it's also been useful to hear about other subjects and think about how those could be applied, because a lot of these strategies would just require a little bit of tweaking, and I'm sure they would work in different subjects as well. So just to finish it off, wanted to come back to the teacher standards progression framework, and just put on there what you need to do to get to a C by the end of the year. So it's not something you need to worry about right now, but it is really useful to think, how can I improve my practice and upskill myself using some of the ideas that I've heard tonight in order to help myself along the way to get there. And yeah, just to go back to the objectives, hopefully we've achieved some of these things and you've felt like you've got what you wanted out of this call. Amel is just about to hopefully put the link to the feedback into the chat. Do really encourage you to use that if you found this useful. If you think we should do something similar to this again, do use the feedback form to let us know that. Equally, if it's the opposite, we really need to hear that and really want to hear that from you. So do that, whether you found it useful or if there were areas that we could improve on next time.
Yeah, just to flag, if you did find this session useful, then in half term 4 we're going to be running a similar session for the other half of the cohort, but there's no restrictions on you joining that call or not. So if you want to share new ideas later on in the year, or to gain some new ones later on in the year, then we will make sure that you're aware of that as well. And can also just say thanks to our ambassadors who've joined us this evening. We really appreciate you giving something back and contributing to tonight.
So you'll all be pleased to hear that we have finished 10 minutes early, but that means you've got 10 minutes to follow that link and give us some feedback on the call. I'll be sharing the resources from this by email. Ideally, if I can figure out how to get that to work, because it's quite a large PowerPoint, in the next couple of days or early next week. But do get in touch with people using that email if you want to carry on the conversation and ask them about their resource, or ask them about more information about what they've discussed, because there's been some great ideas that I'm sure you'll want to hear more about and carry on those conversations. If the feedback link isn't working, then we'll make sure to share a version of the link that is in that email as well. So thank you all for your time and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Shane.